The website to pre-order the Polymega has gone down.
A lot of people seem to have a lot of questions.
And we've got answers.
Hot take.
After we completed our last video talking about the Polymega, a lot of folks started sending in comments to us and getting a little bit nervous about this device actually being real.
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about this device. A lot of folks went to the website to pre-order, and there's like rumors that the site was attacked. Supposedly there were like 400,000 visits to the website very, very quickly. So there's some shadiness there, but we don't have like any proof or anything like that.
What we can tell you right now, though, is that the website itself is still not operational at the moment of this recording.
That's right. If you go to polymega.com right now, you just get please stand by with like some rendering of the console itself.
So it's been about 2 days now. Now, look, folks, I can understand that we're hesitant about newer hardware coming out and discussing newer hardware because...
We should be.
We should be. Yeah. We really should. When folks come to Kickstarter, when they go to Indiegogo, when they ask for money to develop a product, it can be a little bit worrisome because sometimes they can lie and not be truthful. Now, in this one instance, and from my own personal experience, when a device has gone to Kickstarter, that means that there's an actual working prototype that has been shown off, and there's a little bit more legitimacy to that project. If something goes to Indiegogo, if you see it on Indiegogo and it didn't start first on Kickstarter, that means there doesn't really have to be a prototype for it to be real.
Yeah, it's a little scarier to jump on board with that because there really is no physical thing backing up what they seem to be telling consumers.
Yes. Now, in the trailer that they've shown off for this device, we've actually seen 3D renders of what the device is supposed to look like. But what we are to understand is that at E3, they did actually show a real working version of this thing to a bunch of journalists. So we do know that there is a working model out there, and it's not just some mystery thing that doesn't exist.
And one of the big things that's kind of come out recently, the creators have spoken with Nintendo Life, and it turns out that the E3 build of the machine has undergone quite a few tweaks since then, and some of the things that we've reported on even just a couple of days ago have changed, and some things have come to light.
Yes. Now, what we're going to talk about is still early in the process. Basically, all the information we're getting right now is directly from Nintendo Life. I encourage you guys to go take a look at their website and look at the information yourself. It's a really neat article. But this is something you need to keep in mind with anything that you're looking at when it deals with early kind of information. Some of these companies that are just starting up, and I know this firsthand, can sometimes be very bad with communication because they don't know how to manage it. It's like a giant wall of people trying to ask a billion questions at once. Some of those questions are already answered, and some of them are not. Typically, when you have a Kickstarter page, there's an FAQ section that you can put a whole bunch of questions on and then answer them, and that's a great thing to have. We don't really have anything like this here, so we're just going off some basic stuff. Now, to establish that we do know quite a bit about these, some of the technology that's going into this, and just to understand what kind of ideas could be at play, we've reviewed these systems here in the past. Actually, we haven't reviewed this one yet, but it will be happening.
We've used them in reviews. We've used all of these in reviews.
Okay, so we've reviewed the Retron 5. Now, the Retron 5, we're wanting to talk about this one a little bit because this is a software emulation device.
Yes.
It's got multiple cartridge slots for a whole bunch of different game consoles, and it works fairly well. However, it's been rumored and reported from many sources that the emulators used in that machine were actually taken from sources without permission, which can be a very bad thing, especially in the community.
So that's something that we can talk about with the Polymega right now, because we were wondering, we spoke last time about how Polymega said that a lot of the emulators, all of the emulators that were going to be in this machine were in-house made emulators, and through the information that we've sort of gleaned today, we've learned that they licensed the Sega Saturn emulator, at least, from another author, and I guess they were kind of tweaking that emulator to make it work on the Polymega itself, which makes sense, because that's a heck of a lot of emulators in one machine, right?
Now, the reason I wanted to bring this onto the table and show you guys this device, and we have a video of this, I would recommend you watch the review on it. At the time, we didn't know that the actual hardware inside and the software inside may have been borrowed from other sources. Not the hardware, but the software specifically. This can happen. You can have a device that plays multiple consoles and it works great. This device does work quite well. However, it is software emulation, so there's certain things it can't do. That's like playing multi-region cards carts, not multi-region carts, but carts that have SD card slots in them that allow you to play multiple ROMs off the cartridge itself.
Right.
Some other external devices may not work, because essentially what this device does is when you put the cartridge in the system, it takes all the information and saves it in the memory within the console for a brief moment, and then when you've taken out the cartridge, it deletes that information.
Yeah, so one of the main things about this system that it doesn't do is play the games literally from the card itself.
Yes, that's basically what that means.
Yes.
You're never actually, like, if you were to stop the process of it deleting the cartridge, you could take the cartridge out, and you can hack this thing to do something similar to that, and then the game just remains in the memory. That is how this stuff can work, and it is a real thing that you can do. With that in mind, there was something they talked about there with FPGA chips.
So, okay, when we first had heard news, like new news about the system a few days ago, we had heard that there was an FPGA chip embedded into the standard system itself. That was the CD-ROM drive. That's the base system. The base system can play PS1, it can play Sega Cd, Sega Saturn, Neo Geo CD games.
Yes.
There supposedly was an FPGA chip in there for the E3 build. Now, that FPGA chip has since been removed. The team has said that because they're including a new CPU in the system, a more powerful, I believe, dual-core CPU, they've since removed the FPGA chip, supposedly because they don't need it.
Now, that's a bold claim, because there's a lot of gamers out there that prefer to have FPGA emulation. Now, basically what an FPGA chip is, and this is why we brought these out, this is the Super NT. We did a video on this recently, and we are going to be doing one on this as well. This is the Retro USB AVS. Both of these systems are FPGA-based systems. Now, basically what that means is that there's a chip in here, in basic terms, that just replicates the hardware of the original system.
It's like a tiny Super Nintendo is within this system.
Yes. Now, the reason why they have that there is because they want the most accurate emulation.
Right.
When they're doing something like that, they can actually put the cartridge on here, even if it's a multi-cart, like we talked about with an SD card and stuff like that, and it will actually run it because it's using the actual cartridge. FPGA chips are fast, they're highly modifiable, so that's why those chips are being used. That's what that means. Whenever you hear somebody say they're using an FPGA chip for the system, they're basically talking about that kind of thing. You can still use an FPGA chip and then have it software emulate if you want, but what people are trying to do is hardware-based emulation as close as they can to the approximate original capacities and performance of those systems. But because the FPGA chip is so customizable, you can make these systems run at higher resolutions than what the original systems were not simply capable of doing. That's why you see this happening.
So I wanted to ask you, since they're removing the FPGA chip from the base console itself, the base console, like I said, plays a lot of the CD-ROM games, the classic CD-ROM system games. Them removing that FPGA chip, will that... How do you see that affecting how you play those games?
So this is the conversation that's been online right now. Now look, we're going to talk about the cartridges later on in the video, but let's just talk about the CD-based stuff. So what we know is that they're attempting to run Sega Cd.
Okay, Sega CD, PS1, Neo Geo CD, and Sega Saturn.
Sega Saturn.
Yes.
4 games. And TurboGrafx CD.
Oh yeah, TurboGrafx CD as well.
So thank you, Robin. So we've got quite a number of disk-based systems there that it's trying to run for. Now, here's how this works. Basically, the idea of running software emulation for devices like that is not so obscene. I know most folks out there don't like the idea that they're not going to have an FPGA chip to run those things, but keep this in mind. If you're trying to play PlayStation 1 games on any PlayStation 3 out there besides the original fat model in North America and the original Japanese model, that original, all the PlayStation 3s that exist that play those original PlayStation 1 discs are actually creating a software emulation of the original PlayStation 1.
Yes.
If you were to get a PlayStation Portable or a PlayStation Vita, they also can run PlayStation 1 games as well through the download packages and stuff.
That's right.
That right there, that's just emulation. And the emulation is fantastic. It's a really good, very accurate representation of what the original PlayStation hardware is like, and it gives you great performance, which usually has improved loading times. Now, with that in mind, that doesn't mean you're going to get the same thing with all the other systems, but PlayStation emulation has been out there for a while, and we've seen it done very, very well. We have not seen Sega CD emulation in any big significant way.
Well, in a box per se. We've seen it online. Like you could download an emulator, like a website or something, but having a standardized box that can play these CD-based games is something brand new.
Yeah. There was a point in time where some versions of older games, like on the Sega 32X and the Sega Cd, may have been ported over and moved over to other systems, but once that happened, they weren't really relying on the original code of the structure of the Sega Cd itself or the 32X itself. Now, with that, in that weird way, Neo Geo CD simply was only ever on one system. We never saw it got moved over to anything else. When it comes to Sega Saturn, we have seen certain Sega Saturn games get moved over to other platforms in one way or another. A great example of this is Panzer Dragoon Orta on the Xbox original.
Well, the Panzer Dragoon. Oh yes. On Panzer Dragoon Orta, not Orta itself, but there was the original Panzer Dragoon game is unlockable.
Yes. Now this is an issue that exists with a lot of these older systems. They're harder to come by for some of these consoles, and then to play these games on the original hardware can be a bit of an issue because the discs can have issues as well too. Now, software emulation to run these things is fine. You can do it, and you can do it very well. The way that a cartridge works, and the reason why an FPGA chip is so good for cartridges, in my opinion, in my opinion, when you're playing something off that, you get a better representation of the original hardware that way. Now, there are going to be things that an FPGA chip could do really well when it comes to CD-based games, but traditionally, on how I am to understand how most CD-based systems work, is that the CD is read because at the time the disk drives were not very quick, and a lot of the information would be saved into the memory of the system for a small amount of time.
So it's almost like the CDs being dumped in a way anyway. So yeah, maybe an FPGA wouldn't be quite as important because it's already...
That's essentially what it is. Now, I'm not saying they couldn't make an FPGA-based system. They could, but I have seen software emulation for these systems that has worked fantastically. To use a great example on PlayStation, if you've ever played Vigilante 8, a really cool game on the PlayStation that's
like Twisted Metal.
Yeah, like Twisted Metal, but 1970s theme. It's one of my favorite games. When you play that game, any mission you're playing where people are like driving around and stuff like that, you can open up the disk drive, like the actual hood of the PlayStation, and you can put in a music CD and just play music because the game's information from that level that's being played has been saved onto the actual memory itself at that time.
It's already in the memory, so you can do that functionality.
And that's basically what happens with a lot of games. A lot of them kind of save as much information as they can into the RAM. Sometimes it keeps reading and it keeps loading, stuff like that, but traditionally what you're getting is Redbook audio, which is essentially this audio file that's still on the CD that's essentially just an audio disc, and it's a part of that disk itself, and it's just using that to offset the processing power it would take to decode digital audio. This is how those systems work, and none of the systems they've discussed are very different. So they're all like crazy different in terms of the architecture they're based upon but there is no, like the Sega Saturn runs almost the same way as a PlayStation, almost the same way as a Dreamcast.
You're talking about like how an optical disc reader works, basically.
They basically take the information that way and bring it down.
So some of the other information that we learned today was that there are, so the base module itself, it doesn't mean that an FPGA can never be introduced to it. So they did say that they will have possibly an FPGA chip within like a Famicom module later. So do you think... do you see that there would be like issues there? Would there be some sort of a bottleneck or something? Or is this something we have to wait and see?
This is a wait and see thing. We've never seen anyone do that before. The idea with these systems that you buy one system and it has it already integrated. If there was an additional attachment to these, that would be interesting. But this is something
so new that we can't even really point to another console on the market right now that does this whole module sort of shtick. Right?
For all we know, the module itself is just a playable version of the system, and it's just basically bypassing the video signal directly to the console, not using the base console that much. But from what we've seen, the fact that there's a digital storefront and all that stuff, that sounds a bit more impressive. Interestingly enough, what is the module's purpose then? If it's not just FPGA based, is it just to get the certain games that are in there? Is it just to get cartridge support?
Because there are supposed to be 5, I think, preloaded games into each module. Is it just to have the support for the controllers? We're not 100% sure.
Because honestly, because it's software based at this point, and we know that they're going to be offering some software based solution, that could mean that the digital storefront would work on the base model of the console, and that way people could download games directly to the base system without actually having the module.
It's going to be like.
So
So yeah, the whole FPGA chip thing seems to be discarded with a lot of these modules, though. So we did read that the FPGA chip could be used in the Famicom module, but I also read today that there were no plans for the FPGA chip to be in some of the other modules, which I found pretty striking. So they said there were no plans for the TurboGrafx, the PC Engine, of course, the NES, or the Genesis to have an FPGA chip inside. And the SNES launch module won't have an FPGA chip, but a little later on, there are plans to have an FPGA chip integrated. Which
Because this is the Super NT, and the Super NT is a Super Nintendo with an FPGA in it. Now, this was designed, the FPGA stuff and all that was designed by Kevtris, and he is this amazing guy in a whole bunch of different forums. Atari Age, I think he's a part of that.
He worked his butt off to get this FPGA chip to be perfectly in sync with what an SNES was like.
Yeah, this is not easy. This is hard, and Kevtris had his work out ahead of him, and he did a good job. This is one of the best systems we've ever reviewed on the show, okay? With that in mind, the idea that they were wanting to make an FPGA chip for every single system, they were saying they were going to. I just didn't think, it sounded crazy.
They made it sound more like there's a single FPGA chip in the base model, and then everything else would kind of link into that. So we just kind of thought that it would be like a use case like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Now, what's crazy about this is, unfortunately, I can't give you a hardware-specific answer on this, because this starts to get super technical.
Yep.
But as long as the FPGA chip isn't being used to run multiple systems at the same time, theoretically, it could be updated just to run one thing, and then another thing, and then another thing.
And that sounds like it's going to be like a use case thing for these modules. They're going to make it so that only specific modules will have that FPGA chip, and they won't have to worry about multitasking in that sort of way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a heavy task. Now, having a single FPGA chip that is updated to run multiple things, that's one whole other argument and discussion. But the idea of having multiple FPGA chips in multiple boxes, that starts to get very pricey and expensive. FPGA chips are not very cheap, and that's why the prices on these can go up.
Yeah, well, speaking of which, though, like the FPGA chips being in modules, they did say that they're open to kind of licensing out the rights for third-party developers to have modules with integrated FPGA chips in them used with the system itself. So if nothing else, like learning that news, it tells us that they're open to have other people come in and tinker a little bit with their device.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
In essence, essentially, if there was a company that was, let's just say Neo Geo wanted to, and Neo Geo said, "Hey, we want to make an official attachment to your system," they could literally do that with this. The idea there is really interesting, but there is an issue that happens with, and this is why I'm hoping that many of these games are supported with the internal hardware as it is, because now your digital storefront is based off the concept that you have all of these companies actually making items or kind of like working on these things individually. So if you wanted to play a Super Nintendo game and you actually do need that module, now you have to go out and buy a module just to play that, so those sales of that game might be a little bit lower because people would have to go out and buy that specific module. The more modules you add, the more cost you get, and the best example of this I can mention is the Sega Genesis. We had the Sega CD, the 32X, we had Sega Channel, we had all these additionals.
Power base converter.
Absolutely, yeah. We had all these things that just kept adding on and adding on and adding on, and it starts to get a little bit more complex and difficult the more you go. Then you also have to deal with the real possibility. Now, I have an idea that Sega may be more forthcoming with their IPs and willing to allow many of their games to exist on this platform and being sold through the digital storefront. But Nintendo is definitely not going to want to do that. Sony's core franchises, they're definitely not going to want to do that. And then you're going to start to have issues with legality and rights. Many of these PlayStation games have like Sony license whatever, or Nintendo license whatever. Are they going to be so open and willing to do this stuff? Now, Nintendo is in an interesting position with the Switch, where they don't really seem to be attacking the idea of making a virtual console right now. And Sony seems to be a little bit lax on it as well. So are they going to care that somebody's coming out and doing this stuff? Are they going to have some legal precedent where they go, hey, you can't do this?
So you're speaking specifically of the classic games being on their storefront, per se? Yeah, it could be a really huge issue. I was thinking, like, as far as the modules are concerned, we're I think more likely to see folks that are like, the word that comes to mind is like hobbyists, but these guys are very passionate about what they do. Like, these are not official Nintendo development teams working on this device.
These are cool.
Yeah, I would see like folks that have developed like maybe stuff like Hyperkin coming in with modules, but the idea of possibly having like an official like Neo Geo developed module to plug into the system itself does excite me. I just don't think it's going to happen.
I mean, that's realistically the place it's going to go. It's going to get really strange, and seeing digital games get sold digitally on a storefront is in direct competition with their current marketing ideas, right? So there's a lot there at play that can be very crazy.
I'm very much doubting we're going to see a Nintendo pop into that storefront itself, but that doesn't at all mean that you're not going to be able to play your Nintendo games on this thing, because you can still dump those ROMs and everything, and it'll still be in your library. So yeah, the store might be weird. But,
now, it's going to be strange.
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of library they're going to bring to the table.
Yeah.
But what I think, all of this stuff that just kind of came into be, and the more information we get, it paints a picture that isn't so, like, clear, right? We don't know now exactly what they're planning. We wish that there was more of a... I honestly believe everything we're hearing is an issue with communication. That's all it is.
Well, we're going to try and get an interview at some point.
Absolutely.
It seems like they're leaning very heavily on this new CPU. So we have to see what they do with this thing, because they're saying that this will be able to run things super smoothly. But again, until we get our hands on the hardware itself, it's so hard to make any sort of concrete statement about anything, right?
What's in the Retron 5, I do not remember the exact specs, but I do know that is far, from what I saw, what they were talking about, the processor, this is far less powerful, and it's capable of running all the systems on there that it wants to run. However, I don't believe what's in there would be able to run something like a PlayStation 1.
No.
So the moment you get into the Saturn, the moment you get into the PlayStation 1, and specifically when they talked about Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast, that's when you start to get into far more complex ideas. These are systems that were very, very difficult to emulate and are still difficult to emulate. So, and like Sega themselves has issues with them.
Supposedly, now we've learned that they took the FPGA chip out specifically because they're looking into N64 like emulation, and because of the Sega Saturn emulation, they needed that CPU in there, that more powerful CPU.
Now, I don't think you're going to get a bad device if it's just based upon this initial processor and it's not an FPGA, but I do know that there's going to be folks out there that want that better stuff. So this is how I will basically state this, because it's still all early days. If they make the system as it stands software based and that's it, that's cool. And if they have the additional modules so that you have to get cartridges and you play the cartridges with the FPGA chip, that's a smart way. Because look, not everybody out there wants to collect these games individually. Sometimes they just want a system that can play some of these old games through digital files. That's an easy way to do it. But the moment you introduce an FPGA, you're really looking at trying to do it properly with a cartridge. And I think that's what folks really want out there for that. So having it attached to a module, I think that's a smart idea. But they've already stated that the SNES, the first one anyway, is not going to have an FPGA.
It sounds like there's going to be a sparse use of the FPGA's capabilities, so we're going to have to see what happens there. It's not being mentioned all that much.
It's a very strange predicament to be in, and they have said that they have these weird technologies they're going to be using to kind of blend things together, but we just need more information to know if that's going to be a realistic thing. So, Adam, are you confident in this thing, or are you a little bit worried?
Of course, when the initial announcement came out, or the trailer showcasing the unit just recently, I got really excited. But I'm just optimistic, but still hesitant, because we live in a world where Kickstarter things happen and Indiegogo campaigns go sour and stuff like that. This isn't like those per se, and we have seen physical hardware, so that makes me feel a little bit better about things, but put it in my hands, and I'll be able to tell you how I feel then, man. That's like, at the end of the day, I can't say one way or another whether this is going to be a success until we have it.
I get that. For me personally, I I really just want to see a system that can run CD-based retro consoles.
That's so exciting.
That's it. If it didn't do the cartridges, I could totally understand that.
Right.
But I really desperately want to see a system that can run modern Sega CD that on a modern system, that can run Neo Geo CD, because I want those games to be something that a lot of people can enjoy on their modern systems.
And a lot of those old systems were at the very beginning of CD-ROM tech, right? So they break down so easily and stuff, and this could be a solution. It could be a Band-Aid for that portion of gaming. You can still have the games, and you just have this one system that plays a bunch of CD stuff.
Absolutely. So, folks, now that this new information is out there, are you still excited about the Polymega, or are you a bit less excited? Let us know what you think in the comments below.